All right, you are live.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and call the meeting of the Grants Subcommittee to order at 11:02 on this Veterans Day. Just thank you to all of our veterans who've served our country. Can you do roll call, please?
Vice President Palmer.
Here.
Director Fair.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you. We'll move to public comment. Anyone online?
Seeing none.
None. All right, thank you. Then moving to administrative items. 4 is consent agenda and approval from June 27th. All right. First, second. All those in favor? Aye. All right, thank you. Business items. 5. Discussion on future grants.
All right, so this is the meat of the matter today, right? So we've not met, as you can see, since June, so it's been 5 months. One of the things I wanted to talk about is something that I've been working on, and while it's slightly dated, and I realize that it is painting an extremely optimistic picture from a timeline perspective, meaning I don't think it's legitimately possible to achieve this timeline. One of the things I was trying to figure out was, when do we need grant dollars? And how does that fit into a much larger sort of project plan of activities over the next quite some time? Realize we're going to put this up on the screen so anybody who's watching the video later can see it as well. And I do actually have a good couple of copies of paper. One, I gave Julie the other one the other day when you met with her. But I'll bring this up so you can see it. Let me share my screen, and then I'll introduce you to what I'm talking about, and you can kind of see it. So I put this together in a somewhat Microsoft project-y sort of an approach. Come on, look. There we go. Make it a little bigger, so I don't know, maybe it's big enough given the proximity you guys have. In a somewhat Microsoft project-y kind of approach, right? So what you have going across the top here, I did these just like you would in Microsoft Project. You got a task. The bold is the kind of category, and then these are kind of subtasks. Some sort of a duration. If there's something that ties to it as a predecessor or something that finishes, that's what you do with Microsoft Project. And then the funding required, I added this. And numbers in red are going to be funding I don't think we have. And I'll explain why as I go through this. And the numbers in black, well, maybe we have it, maybe we don't. And then I've shrunk this down to be as small as possible so you can see the remainder of 2025, all of 2026, and all of 2027 to the extent possible. So why is the timeline important? Well, there's a couple of things that are happening here simultaneously. Not only are we trying to get through design and have a project and all that, but you got to remember when it comes in particular to grants and funding and financing, for us, I'm assuming, and I think it's the same assumption, that we're going to be adding anything that we're going to charge property owners to the property tax bill, right? Keep in mind, it's a short window to get onto the property tax bill. If you miss that window, you're delayed a year. You can't, if you don't hit that July date,
What is the window?
July, basically. July.
So July of whatever year, in order to be on for the following year.
Correct. And that's that effort your board goes through every year to adopt the budget and then have that resolution where we update the tax roll and all that sort of stuff. Now, is there a chance if you missed it by 5 or 6 days, you can still get on it? Yes, probably. But if you get into, I'll just say, you get into this time of year after property tax bills have already been released, there is zero chance, okay? And so part of me was just trying to get this laid out from here's the long-term horizon of things, as well as short-term, as well as consider some financing issues. Looks like a good question.
Is that, there's no supplemental?
Not for something like this. I've never seen that done for something like this.
I'm not suggesting you should.
Yeah. I wouldn't say 100% no, but I've never seen it done for something like this.
Well, my only thought on that too is that you have you have the installments and when the, the taxes are paid, or in this case, it would be the assessment, and then money gets available, and a loan for whatever part of the project is not grant funded. It seems to me you could negotiate, like if we were at this time of year, you could, like when you buy a car, you buy the car and then the first payment comes, in the next cycle or whatnot. And I'm wondering if that's a feasible option as well.
For sure. So let me just say, because I've met with a number of different groups. I've met with water board and grant representatives. I've met with bond counsel and bond representatives, and I've met with the IBank, which gives straight up loans. Focusing on the latter two, because they're giving you a loan of some sort or a bond. Yes, you can delay payments, but you don't delay interest.
No.
Right.
So if you miss the property tax window, yeah, you can still move forward, but just know you're gonna pay interest with no principal payment for however long, right? As much as a year, maybe longer, depending on the longer time period. So I don't want us to get caught up in this if I could, because I'm just trying to set the stage for why I put this together. And I want you to recognize, I recognize these dates are gonna change. I just wanted to get something on paper, okay? So that we could have a conversation about the grants in particular in this case. And while the timeline is the timeline, it's going to change.
Could you maybe to that, though, maybe not to start working the problem, but even highlight the July and August step in the timeline, those months?
Yeah,
Just so we're thinking.
I could add a note that makes that clear. Yeah, I could do that. That's easy enough.
Well, and just on that too, there are pieces that fall into that as well. For example, let's say we were ready to go now. You might not start construction. A sewer can be built through any time of year. I mean, it's not like I'm very familiar with storm drainage construction. However, you do get more done in a non-rain period. So, I mean, weather and there's a lot of things that go into that. So, yeah, it's an interesting discussion that probably got a couple of different angles and a couple of different solutions to it as well.
For sure. I'm just, again, I told you, I'm outlining a very narrow path, and the narrow path is, you get approval, you get to a team pass, get approval for your grants and funding, and you start construction, and all of that based on the subsequent property tax bill, and you move forward like,
And that's predicated on approval. So I feel like we've got, to me, well, why don't you finish and laying it out, and I will do my best to not.
So, again, I just wanted to have an area to capture funding that I felt was still needed. I'll explain these numbers in just a minute. And so I'm just gonna kind of slide down here. So design, we're doing right now, the Walsh Group is working on their true-up, meaning if the regen and Stantec designs up to, I don't know what the actual percentage is, call it 50, I don't know, because Stantec was much further along and regen was more like 10 or 15. And a 30-year lifetime, right? They have said, and I need to re-verify this because they just sent me another schedule last week, about 28 weeks to do that. That was part of their original plan. They've moved things around a little bit, but somewhere in early Q2, presumably they're going to come to the board, the full board, with their kind of final 50% document, right? Those numbers would be the ones the board could choose or not choose to go forward with the 218. And yes, the further you are from finished documents, the less accurate those numbers are. They're still order of magnitude correct, but depending upon when you start construction and so on and so forth. So we'll talk about that some more as we get closer to that date. My assumption is that the board is going to be talking about it before then, but as we get closer, we're going to see interim versions of their final document. But I gave the board a month to make a collection decision. You're going to be talking about it 4 months, but you're going to have true numbers, and you're going to be able to say, look, do we want this, that, or the other, right? So I just had to make an assumption. If somebody said, oh, guy, that's way off, you need 12 months. Well, we can talk about that. So I gave the board a month to do that. What's important about that? Well, Wallace Group isn't going to start final 90% design until I have that decision, right? No sense in doing final design if they don't know what the community and the board wants to do from a collection perspective. That 90% design collection system, they've listed it about 44 weeks, just shy of a year. So that gets you all the way out here to 2027, and we'll come back to that date in just a minute. At the same time, there's this bucket called environmental. Environmental work has already begun. I put that as a finish with the same time as the collections selection. Could that go longer? Absolutely, right? But based on where we're at today and what we think is going to happen, short of some sort of lawsuit, which is always a possibility, that'll finish on or before the time that the board makes a decision and votes about what kind of collection. Now, the reality is, for instance, within the community, depth doesn't matter so much from an environmental perspective. It's an placement of lines, right? And whether we use effluent or gravity, the placement is basically the same, it's just the depth. Going back, sorry, I missed this. So part of that that big number that was up above under the funding, 1.1 million of that is the other half of the Wallace Group contract to get us to 100% design. So I've said, and I believe if we, timing wise, if funding lines up the way I expect it to, timing wise, the 403 we can pay for out of either existing funds or funds that we will have collected by the time that bill comes due. We don't have the funds to do 1.1 million. Environmental 58 we do have. Go ahead.
Is that 1.175 planning and design inclusive of the 1.1 below?
Right. Yes. So that number is these two numbers together. It's the assessment engineering at about 75 grand, and
got it.
So it's those two together. I just wanted to place.
I understand.
To put them into a single bucket.
I see.
So assessment engineering. I've spoken to both DTA as well as NV5. NV5 just gave us a bid this week that's a little higher than this. But that timeline wise is about right. They're going to need a little time after the board, again, kind of ties back to this decision, right? Once you said, oh, we're going to use this collection, which ties to these costs, they can then do an assessment. Now, there's a bunch of work they can do before then, right? Make sure all the parcels correct, make sure whatever the board decides, is it size, is it zoning, is it whatever, right? The board can have that conversation up till, May of next year to get us that far along. And then down here at the bottom, just a couple more things. We've got all this Prop 218 stuff that's going on that your board's going to see, and you looked at the agenda for tomorrow night. We've got the communications and polling folks are on the agenda. These numbers are early numbers. I got to tweak those around a little bit just to get them correct. But I believe we have the funds to pay for all of this. Okay, based again timing, when we would have to have the expense, so on and so forth. And this is a rough sort of outline of what's going to happen. You're going to have communications going on for much longer than the event itself. Polling going on through the summer, assuming this timeline. You've got about a month just to put together the documents that have to be officially published and mailed and all that sort of stuff. You've got the process itself. You've got to have timelines, again, legally required timelines for all the notifications and the hearings and all that. And then eventually you get to a hearing. So this schedule outlines a process that would mean the end of next year. Your board may decide, we don't want to do it, next year at that time.
Can you just, so I can see that communication vis-a-vis the work that's happening up above, can you scroll up? There we go. Okay, thank you. So I'm
I'm almost done. So construction, Tom knows this, once we got a 90% design and that's tied to the 90% design, you need time to get the docs out there, you need time for construction folks to decide. And this kind of assumes the design build process, and there are other processes that the board might decide to use that can be shorter on this end of things. I gave us 5 weeks to review those bids. And then, milestone out here for the board to select a contractor. So, from when you start that process in March, it's 6 months, easy. And that might be optimistic in a construction, depending on what we decide to do and how we decide to do it. Here's a window that's important for this group because this speaks to the grants process. And if we go with a bond coupled with grants or grants coupled with bonds, it's actually a shorter process. If we go with the iBank, they actually require a little longer timeline because they're loaning you money without having to go out into the market. And it's just a longer process. And I've got the iBank, I'm just going to send them our quarterly newsletter and they're going to check in with us, see where we're at, what's going on. So they're well keeped. And then when I scroll down, this is the last one of the activities. We've got other activities going on. We've got the groundwater well sampling. I'm not sure we have the funds to do all of the stuff above and pay for that. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit tomorrow. So something to consider. And then somewhere out here, we've got in 4 of 27, and I guess it got knocked off, but it's buried in there. And there's a reapproval, essentially a laugh, right? And we told them we would be through this 218 process by the time we came back to them in 2027. This sort of timeline, even if it slips a month or two, gets us there. But I'm still very focused on trying to get us there at the end of next year. So now let me go back, because for this group, this is the number, right? That we need to be hyper focused on in the short term, or we run out of runway, and I don't know where those funds are going to come from, but I've got some more information for you. Let me pause there. You can ask me questions about this very optimistic timeline that I put together. But again, I had to start somewhere, right? You got to put pen to paper at some point.
Well, and if I may, and Gotti, you and I have talked about this, going out to bid before you have absolute complete construction documents, I have to think and hear more about that. It's not anything I've done before. There are risks with that. A design build, maybe. And so there's just, there's so many things that hinge on all of these too. So, I totally understand, this is, the best case. Really, the one thing, I guess that's what we're here to talk about too, is if we don't get the 1.1 to finish the design, then none of that works either. That is critical right now.
Right.
That 1.1 million. And be the topic of some of the items that we talked about. I don't know when the appropriate time to talk about. I guess we're in discussion of future grants. I had a discussion with Assemblyman Hart briefly about it. And I'd asked to have a meeting to follow up on it. Just as a board member, if I get a meeting on this calendar, maybe I'd circle back with you and maybe let the president decide, who would be there and in what fashion. But, after talking to him, I contacted staff and say, we need to talk to you about this, and we need to do the same thing with Senator Ramon, whom I haven't talked with. I know the people at Assemblyman Hart's office, but I don't know the people at Senator Ramon's office.
So piggybacking on that, in the meeting I had with Assemblymember Hart after Director Fayram was, we
Beat you to it.
he beat us to the sidewalk meeting. Julie and I happened to end up being like, hey, did you know? And we went together. We're like, oh no, it's a Brown Act thing. So we hung around while Director Fayram finished his time.
Yeah, and I just state that I finished with Assemblyman Hart, saw you two, and avoided you and went straight to my car.
And he left, and we stayed away to interact and then to acknowledge that we shouldn't be there until he was done. So that's a full disclosure. So in our follow-up conversation with him, I pitched, and he liked the idea of convening himself, Senator Lamone, the water board, the county, and us. And to talk about how we get this done. And I think I think I've been an advocate of that approach. I think it's gonna help us go farther faster in terms of, look, here's the deal, here's where we need your help. This is what, we even need this money to get us into the game until we get an extra $1 million. We can't even talk about going to a Prop 218. So and I think it's important for our constituents to see that we're convening these other parties who have had responsibility for this issue prior to the district coming into existence, to see what they're gonna do for the solution. So I think that, but what is the ask? I think part of it's education, and then part of it's this, we need $1 million, having well-baked numbers that are, this is part A, which is here's the funding we need to complete the work to get to a 218. And then B, we've continued to discuss how do we reduce the construction cost to make it palpable and increase the probability of our success in the 218.
Well, I think
And have them, it's like, if the block is anyway, I know what the fiscal situation looks like, but it's like, so what? Like, now we either have to figure out if there's political will to help us, or we all need to have our, everyone's hands on the wheel on this, you know what I mean? So, anyway, so that's but I think we need to be organized, do some work ahead of time, do a brief, here's the deal, and I want eyeballs to eyeballs on how are we gonna work this together? Because I also feel like that's how we bring the county along, or the water board tastefully. I don't know. But anyway, that's he liked the idea. He said the senator, given her role, is very busy, but we should ask.
But she has a pretty pivotal position as well.
Well, that's why we're in this window with our state leaders, where if we're gonna be able to get anything done in this political climate, it's potential, there is good alignment, I'll say, not alignment. I'm struggling with the appropriate characterization of the situation, but we have leaders who are strong and effective. So we should find out what they're willing to do and what they can do. So.
I think one other element to this too is as we look at the financing of our portion outside of any grant. We've had a couple of meetings. I think you were in one, maybe you weren't, with me, Guy, years ago with the it's the federal wing up there in Santa Maria. I forget the urban small. It's the NRCS window that they give loans to small communities for stuff like this. What they do.
I wasn't there, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Why am I?
Yeah, I'm going blank. You got me going down that path there.
Yeah. And I met with them just on my own several months ago, just to check in and make, just, you gotta keep contact with these people. You don't just show up on a Tuesday and say, we need, 30 million on Wednesday morning.
Right.
And so we probably should do that. And I'd be interested as to what the advantages or disadvantages would be from an iBank. I don't know what the iBank interest or requirement. We have no collateral, right, which is where you don't need it. But you've got the iBank, that federal program, and then the state program, the revolving fund, and which is most advantageous. Obviously we want the lowest interest rate, and which one is
Yeah, so a couple of notes on that. You touched on one of them, for instance, with the iBank. Actually, none of these that I spoke to require us to have any collateral. Let's be clear about that. Bonds, so on and so forth. Because we have no credit rating, though, we're not going to get the greatest interest rate, right? We'll be treated basically like a June bond. Just the way they do it, right? Because we don't have any materials to say, yeah, here's what we've got to back it.
Here's the building, yeah.
Didn't they say, and I don't have my notes, forgive me from that meeting, about the county, like,
So I was going there.
signing
Yeah, I was
or
going there now.
paying our guarantor or whatever?
So what a couple of them have said is, if since you don't have any collateral, and since you don't have a credit rating, with the county, there's a co-borrower, or perhaps the county, since you're gonna do it via property tax anyway, would just be the borrower. They said you're gonna get a much better rate by doing that. Save yourselves a lot of money. But we can do it without either of those scenarios. Just, you know, you're gonna save money by doing that. So that, as we get closer, will be something to pursue. It's probably too early to, outside of the meeting you were just describing, to get into that too much. Interestingly though, for instance, with the iBank and the bonds folks, and I think Dr. Farron will appreciate this because it's something he's been saying. I asked explicitly, so what about equipment that's on private property? And they said, unless you're gonna own it and maintain it and have full access to it, we're not gonna give you money for it. So effluent tanks on private property are gonna have to be privately owned, and you won't be able to finance them.
So I think, how does that piece get woven into either, I'm just thinking about when we come to whatever month that is, where we're making a decision about effluent or gravity, that we have that economic element of it, really big.
Good question. By the time we get there, we'll be able to do some financial modeling and give you more info on that.
Would that be
Based
part
on
of the
different-
assessment? And no, that wouldn't be part of it.
So the 30-year comparison that Wall Street is doing, we'll be comparing those numbers for you.
Okay.
And you'll see costs that are verified by a California-based engineering firm as opposed to somebody just throwing them out there. And so we'll have presumably a reasonable grip around what those numbers look like, and then we can talk about what that means for individual property owners versus the district, and finance, not finance, and so on. So I want to take that. So I did also spend some time with representatives from the state water board, as well as our local water board, and another person was on the line who I'm not entirely sure what her role is. She's kind of in the I think she isn't directly tied to the state, is kind of half tied to Region 3, which is what the Central Coast is. Point was, in conversation with them, they outlined three things that stuck with me. One is any sort of application we're going to try and complete, whether it's a planning application or what they would call a full application, needs to be done by December 31st. We're nowhere near being able to have a complete application because we don't have final construction costs and all that. That's really what they're looking for a construction loan. The gentleman on the phone that day said, without really saying it, but he basically said, at this point, being a smaller district with a project under $50 million that's not disadvantaged, basically said, don't plan on any funds from the water board. He said that you guys fall into that weird gap, right? You're not disadvantaged, and you're not so big in LA County where we're going to fund something that's over $50 million and helps thousands and thousands of people. He said he didn't know much about how the planning grant process might go for us, but he said, make sure you get whatever application you're going to in by December 31st. So that's the second thing, and that's two different types of grants. The third one I thought was very helpful was there was a representative, Cecile, get her last name wrong. You know who I mean, who's from our regional. Yeah. You could tell in her questions she's trying to be creative and come up with other ways to potentially help us out. But I think she went into that thinking, no, they get money because they've got a regionalization project. If we go to Solvang, they've got a septic sewer, and the guy at the federal level basically said, yeah, those are great points. And he walked through the process of how you get points for your project. But he kind of noted in that walkthrough that, you're missing the big one right here, and that's disadvantaged community. And that's where the number of points, and without that box being checked, you fall down their funding list. So It was an interesting conversation.
I appreciate that they, would say that, and, I understand what they're saying. I don't buy it. I've cracked many nuts that said we don't do that.
Yep.
FEMA doesn't fund hazard mitigation projects of a certain size, and we did one in Montecito.
Sure.
And so when you have the right set of conditions, things can happen, but, I think it's good to understand where we're at too.
He never said it's not possible. Let me be clear. He just kept going back to you're not disadvantaged, which is where they're funding most of the costs.
And that goes back to the moment in time we're in with our representative.
Yeah, because there are other appropriation measures that I think could be done too. For sure.
Yeah, and that's also important from their timeline perspective, right? So you get into this situation where, let's say you get a grant that requires funding. Well, which sometimes you'll get funding if you have a grant, sometimes you'll get a grant if you have funding. And so securing, in this case, when I've been focused on the $1.1 million could mean, oh, you've got money, you can guarantee us that you have grant match funds. And so you can't, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? It's like, I can't get the funding until I get the grant, well, I can't get the grant until I get the funding. So making sure that those are aligned is critical.
Well, I wonder if there's a process, like, and I'm going back to the federal, small urban development group. I forget what the name of it is. We could in theory get our application in there and receive some type of approval for a placeholder number, 30 million. I don't know what the number we'd be looking for. Our outreach will help us with that. And then we could have an approved project, not funded, but an approved, funding commitment that we haven't drawn the money and started to, owe interest on it yet, but it's there. It's kind of like when we pre-approved on a home loan. We could maybe do something like that, and that might help us with the grants as well.
Yeah, bond funding gets a little interesting because they want to, if they're going to go through the process to give you bond funding for construction, they're ready to go. They're not going to give you pre-approval in that way. I mean, weeks and weeks and weeks, you'll have a couple of weeks kind of thing. But yeah, understood.
Yeah,
Totally agree.
I think it's important for us to find out and be able to articulate to our constituents what financing commitments are available pre-vote and what is post-vote. In other words, we've been thinking, how do we get some, say, subsidize or reduce the cost with some guarantee ahead of time? But in talking to someone over heart, it's like, you can't get anything earmarked in appropriation until it's approved. In other words, you can't condition it to voter approval. You've got to have a project and then come and out. So I think I've got that right. My point is, I'm thinking about how do we what information and what commitments can we have prior to going to a vote that are going to help us maximize success. So those are like the two, because funding construction, that's great, but first there's nothing to fund if we can't get it approved. So I know. So, and I don't know the answer, how we figure that out, like what tools are available to us pre-vote that we could say to voters or to property owners, this is what we've done as a district to reduce the cost ahead of time. I don't know if that's possible, or we have to say we tried, it's not doable, and we're going to approve the project and then finance or go for grants, or we don't construct it until you've gotten the grant. I don't know. Is there language we put in the Prop 218? Again, I'm looking at if I'm putting my property owner hat on rather than my district hat. If you say it's a $40 million project, we don't know how we're going to finance it except to, float a bond or get a loan or both. We think this is what it's going to cost, but we don't have an exact.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Things on that. You will know what it's going to cost. You won't know how it's gonna be paid for necessarily. And I mean, I think there's some differences in opinion here that, maybe even the two of you and certainly with the rest of the board. I will just say from a general manager's perspective and somebody who's done budgets like this before. In fact, you guys have heard me say this before. I never include a grant in the budget until the grant is in our hands because I think it's a slippery slope.
Right.
Just as I wouldn't want to be promising property owners that, yeah, and we're gonna get a grant. And
Fair enough.
the further out timeline goes, of course, construction costs go up. So, right, you get a Prop 218 for 40 million. If it takes you 10 years to get the 30% match, well, now it's no longer 40 million, right? So you gotta think through that. Again, just putting on my general manager's hat, taking off my resident's hat for a minute here. I would say to tell people that we're gonna work like mad to get grants, and we can have all these conversations and tell people where we're at in the list. But people should probably be prepared to fund the full thing, and then we get grants, we pay off the loan, and they don't pay that much, right? If it's a 20% grant, and everybody's flow goes down by 20%.
No, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that I want to go that way though, because no grant funding entity is going to say, you got a fully funded project and you just want to rebate. And I'd rather be in a position, well, I'd like to be in a position where through our communication, we've talked about this, what is the threshold that we think we can get the 218 approved at? And the grant's the difference, and until we get it, that's what it is.
Well, and maybe until we're at 90%, right? And we've got an actual number.
Yes, this is something I think the full board's gonna have to work out. So you're gonna have to come to a conclusion, whatever it is, based on public input. That plan that I showed you earlier is predicated on I'm gonna call it 50%, and then going to the 218. If the board and the public says, nope, we wanna wait till we have the 90%, well, then we've got a I'll just call it $1.2 million gap between now and the 90%. So it has nothing behind it.
So maybe just kind of coming back to this idea of convening the decision makers at the county to state level. It's part of it's an education, right? Here's where we are, here's the challenge we face. And if we're gonna stay on track to meet the LAFCO 2027, get it to a vote, we need to find let's say 1.2. So how are we gonna do that? And then talk with them. So maybe that's the first, maybe that's the first.
Well, I mean, everything else, all discussions are mute.
Yeah.
Until that happens. I mean,
right, because we can't.
Yeah, I realize it's obvious to the two of you, but if somebody were to look at this in the future, our revenues in a year are about $250,000. And let's say a third of that goes to operations just because we need everything else. So let's say you have $175,000 a year to put toward that. It's many, many years. We have to wait until the property tax current assessment catches up with 1.2, which will probably be 1.5 by the time you get there.
Yeah, and then so we either need help to do that or we're back at LAFCO. And so I have a question. I think I know the answer, but I'm focused on the vote, and that is the city is solving piece. And I realize that's gonna be on the O&M side of the construction, isn't it?
There's two pieces, they're both.
there's both, but we have to buy in.
Right, so, and that's factored into the 218.
Right.
So I think we need to have time allocated for that, creating that agreement. Right? I mean, I think we need to show, and if I'm looking at this document, even if it's a single line, just from city is solving, would that go in design?
So as you probably, that's one of the tasks on my priority list. It's actually like number 3 now, as things get cleared off. is to work on the contract with the city of Salt Lake and get that to your board and to the city of Salt Lake. So it's gonna be done well before that timeline.
Okay,
But I can add
I think from a cost standpoint, a time and a cost and
There's gonna
everything.
be some legal in
Yeah,
there and
legal, and then that's gonna take some. I'm not suggesting it should be done, I'm saying it should be a bucket in here, 'cause that's. Whether it's under design, wherever you want to slot it, I think that's also just, again, if I'm a public member looking at this. And then, not really a grant issue, this is more of a budget issue, but where we are timing wise. If we deferred the communications and polling till the next fiscal year. And we cut our groundwater in half, we could fund the assessment engineer. So I'm just on the, well, I'm just thinking, this is $50,000 we have budgeted for comms and polling. And we need to let those contracts now. I don't know, I mean, based on when we're actually gonna be doing that work. It's gonna be in Q3, Q4, Q3, the beginning of Q3, 2026 is the earliest.
Correct.
So all I'm saying is that if we need assessment engineer before the end, before the next fiscal year, or that gets just rolled into that 1.2. Because I could see deferring that and just taking a scalpel to the groundwater sampling.
Simply eliminating that's not gonna get you there, but yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Close. It's,
Yeah.
that's 70, I mean, 50, yeah, that's almost 100,000. Just not,
Sure.
it's a budget issue,
Sure.
not a grant issue.
Again, remember, we get money put into our checking account, right, as property taxes, right? So think December and February.
Well, I know,
I'm
I
sorry.
understand that, but it's, I'm just saying, I'm thinking about how we flight this in terms of
Yeah, I
letting
did,
the money go.
yep. Unless you're gonna push either of those or both out to Q2 27 or beyond, it doesn't really matter, you're still short. And
I think having that information, for me, the understanding, the threshold of what the community would accept is really important,
The polling,
the polling.
definitely.
Because that's also leverage against grant
That's true. Of
grant people as well. So for me, that's
course, I should.
that's pretty important right now.
so maybe I bring us back to the meeting that we've been talking about off and on for months. Does this group have a recommendation about who they'd like to attend? I mean, both internally to the district as well as other players. Specifically, I mean, say the water board, for instance, do you want Ryan?
Jane Gray.
Who?
Jane Gray.
Jane
From the
Gray.
water board.
She's on their board.
Yeah.
She's not.
And she's from, from a decision maker standpoint,
Yeah, I think
she would be,
if staff hear her say things, they are going to go, okay.
well, I come back full circle. I mean, she was, I had a number of conversations with her early on, the Irwin process. I just think I'm thinking about the political will. And having that conversation with the other leaders. And we're gonna A, have tried, and B, I think get a pretty good sense for
I think having her there with the meeting with the assemblyman and the senator.
Yeah.
Would be very, very appropriate and beneficial.
And then, Senator Lamone, Assemblymember Hart, Supervisor Hartman. And then you and Julie and probably you, one of us. The other one could observe as a member of the public. Or make sure it's recorded.
It's probably not a Brown Act meeting.
It's not.
Probably not.
That would,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Well, let's make sure it's not. Because again, to me, this is as much about process and dollars as about politics of it. And we're either all gonna succeed together or we're all gonna fail together. That's how I look at it.
Well, no, I think, yeah, but I was gonna say exactly what you said, but in a different way. They're a player. So
Yeah.
They don't play and we're not successful.
They have responsibility.
They're responsible for that as well.
Yeah, and in the success.
And
So-
success. So,
So we need them as partners to make this happen and to be successful. And they should be.
So I can reach out to all these various offices and try and get this lined up. I'm assuming you're thinking ideally before the new calendar year, which might be dicey with the holidays, but we
Well,
can try.
but
Yeah.
we don't know
I'm
unless
certainly-
we try.
yeah.
And if it has
if
to
it's
be,
not after the first, I mean, yeah, what would you want? You want the candy bar today or the candy bar next week? You want it today, so. But if it's after the first of the year, that's, I mean, realistically.
well, and I think it's important to create some, if it's legitimate, a sense of urgency. Like we have real work that we need help with in order to keep this process moving forward. We've got a window of X months or however we want to couch it, and we're coming to you now in order to keep this thing on track for what your leadership, LAFCO, our residents, our property owners are expecting. And so, as opposed to get in line everyone wants a meeting, let's do what we can to create some urgency around.
From a county budgeteer's perspective, I would tell you already missed the window, right? Because we're in a fiscal year and
Yeah.
should have been talking to us 9 months ago. But, and again,
But we're talking to him now, so we didn't know, we didn't have a idea where we were on the project.
right, well, and, when I look at this, if you talk about the county's, for instance, 26-27 budget, which will start July 1st, you're not that far off.
Right.
That starts in December.
Uh-huh. That's my point. It's
Yeah.
approved, about the same time you all
Yeah.
approve your budget. So from that perspective, you're not that far off. And, I go back to this a number all the time, and that is, what happens if we are not successful? Rob does go back to the county.
Yeah.
And so,
And I want the water board looking at the county saying, it's like, well, anyway, we got the idea. So if we can do it in person, that's ideal. If not, I'd say by Zoom, if we can get the players together sooner rather than later. I'm looking at that. And then, so is that I'm
let's-
looking at how our agenda is.
Yeah, that's fine. You can do that. That's fine. We're talking about trying to get grants, and this is the generic item to get grants. Directions to staff here is pull this meeting together. Are you thinking it's an hour or is it? And who should I work with on the agenda? Rather just work with one of you, get the agenda nailed down, and then we can bring it back to a meeting here before we actually have the meeting, so the public can see what the agenda will be, but I do want to make sure that I've got a concise agenda that I can share with our elected officials, because they're gonna say, well, what's the meeting about?
Yeah.
I want money, but.
Right.
Well, I would be happy to and would like to be involved because, I mean, I know if they say yes or they say no, what really has happened because I've done it. And I think our president should be involved as well.
Right.
So I'd be happy to work on the agenda with you guys or you do with the president. I can just offload, the topics that I think, and then you could do it from there. If you're okay with that.
Yeah, fine.
Lisa.
I'm fine with it. If it isn't a Brown Act meeting, I'd love to be at least a fly on the wall.
All right.
thank you for stepping up on that.
So the conversation here, there are other opportunities potentially out there from WM and other grants. I continue to monitor those. Nothing has come across that struck me as, oh, there's an opportunity for us. Other future grants, solving has yet to including sort of recycling in their approach to what they're doing. If we could get them to include that on their project, or as a result of our incoming effluent being recycled, that would give us more points as well. I don't know, I think you probably know this, but I'm going to say it. So May, I think when the Eastern Management Association implemented the pumping, they had a hearing to AT for pumping. I don't know if that changes the equation for people that used to just have to pay for electricity to get water out of the ground. Now they have to pay for electricity and for every foot they extract. So maybe that somehow affects solving this equation, because that was one of the things, right? It was cheaper to not do anything. Perhaps that fee now says, yeah, maybe I can take a little bit of recycling away. And just to be clear here, the conversation with the grant folks said, you don't have to recycle 100%, right? You just have to have a component that gives you some recycled water.
You kind of do have a component too when it goes down to the river. And there is indirect recycling that goes on when it goes into the underflow.
They don't count that.
Oh, they should.
They don't.
Yeah.
They count that as recharge, not as recycling.
Do you think that
Recycle management.
do you think we should have solving as part of this meeting?
Well, that was actually part of the reason I brought that up.
Just if you're looking at it from a 360-degree funding opportunity, they're not disadvantaged either. But anyway, I don't know the answer. I'm just raising it.
I see no problem with doing that. I don't know that I would hold up the ship to have them there.
No, I wouldn't either.
Yeah, I
think
think having them there, and I would imagine that they've got their wastewater supervisor, and they've got their their general.
City manager.
yeah, Cindy, I would say probably.
Okay. I'll add this option.
Because I think it's just making sure we're sharing information. Because I'm already getting people in Solvang, are you going to make our water rates go up? It's like everyone's freaking out over what's going on for the very reasons you said. The wastewater increase, the world change, and I'm like, well, this should bringing us in should decrease the overall cost per per user. But so I think the more we can be in parallel.
Interesting note on that. In my attachment for tomorrow night's meeting, there are new rules out for wastewater treatment facilities and others related to PFAS and TCE and everything. So additional restrictions and requirements for processors that I don't know where solving's at with all that, but as we know, those sorts of restrictions never lighten up or loosen, right? And you get more of them put on you, which is just one more reason that I personally, wearing my citizen hat, would say, yeah, let's not build our own plant, because then we have to deal with PFAS and everything else.
Yeah, new equipment and maybe a new plant and everything else. But I did want to happen back on the regional board. And the guy you probably remember, we asked directly to the regional board staff for in relation to grants. And this was a couple of years ago, but still it's very very applicable here. Is that we asked them, what is your preferred approach to maximize our ability to get grant funds? And they said, I've said this at board meetings, a gravity system consolidated with salt. So I took that as I was Dorothy, and I'm going to go get the broom.
Right.
And we're going to have a vote here soon, and we are going to bring them back the broom.
Right.
I just saw the Wizard of Oz at the Sphere of Salt.
I wanted to see that.
So that's why I came back to me. Here, we got the broom. And so when you talk, or maybe you mentioned it, Madam Chair, that if they say, well, but you're not disadvantaged. Oh, okay, so now we have to go, no, that's not. We talked about that, and it doesn't oblige them to anything, but we would be bringing back a project that is most appealing to them.
And I think it would be helpful in that meeting for the water board to restate that.
Yeah.
For both Joan and the decision makers and why. So that, because that helps us with it helps us politically with the preferred solution of the regionalization. So I think that meeting is a good first step in just looking at future grant discussion. And then have that and see what comes out of it. I do know, I don't know if if there's a grants person at the county, there's a grants person at Solvang. I think we went and talked about this before. Making sure that our partners are flipping us opportunities or keeping us at the top of mind when things come across.
I can say with certainty that City of Solvang is a third party.
Right.
And they're trying to get additional grant funds for the project they're working by saying we're including the septic sewer folks from Los Olivos in our project. And, so they're trying to do, again, disadvantage, consolidation, septic to sewer, reasoning, right? Those are the four that seem to come up from time to time. So they're trying to say, oh, and we're doing septic to sewer because Los Olivos is going to get us. And just for what it's worth, independently of this larger meeting, I do have a meeting scheduled coming up with Solvang and Water Board and some others, just to make sure that everybody's first of all aware of where we're at in the project and real more focused on that than grants, but do have those meetings coming up.
Great. What else?
There's nobody here, so you don't have to take public comment.
Is there anything under item 6?
Kind of collapsed. Like the daily thought putting was just a single item, but
Do you still keep a document, a spreadsheet? I know Julie had created that spreadsheet of potential grant opportunities. Where do you keep your information from, like if you find out something from Water Board, or where do you have a place you keep that?
I have a little Word doc folder that I throw things into. As formal as that spreadsheet that was massive that she put
Just
together.
thinking about, even if we do a summary of that, I'm thinking again, publicly, what do we have? Just a catalog as opposed to we're working on it. And I'm not suggesting busy work, but even for this committee, just to know. And I think even maybe in that decision maker meeting, like here's everything out here, here's why we don't qualify for it. As opposed to help us, we need money, and spending an hour talking about, well, have you done this? Have you done this? We can show them everything we've done. Right. Either based on timing or.
Sure.
Subcommittee member comment. Thank you.
We adjourn at 12 noon, the strike of the bell.
12:01.
12:01, yeah.
Second. Aye. Thank you all.
Okay.